In this episode, I'm going to talk about how I don't use data to prove I'm right. I use it to prove the system is wrong. So, this that realization changed everything for me. This love for data started back in my second year of teaching. And it started with, so I'm going to take you back. We're going to go back to 2008. And at that time, I was a teacher, and it was my first teaching job where my classroom was very diverse. So, my very first teaching job, I was a bilingual teacher, and 90% of my students was the Latino community. And I was born and raised in a Latino community. So, that's kind of all I knew at that time. I didn't know that you talk to different cultures differently. I showed up as my Latina self, and I learned real fast that that didn't go so well in in a predominantly white community. And so I remember this was my first year teaching in a more diverse classroom. More white families, Latino families, Russian families. I had a big community. Um, when I told my Latino, I was a fifth grade teacher, and I remember when I would tell my Latino families, like, hey, your student is really behind, can't read. We really need to work on this. I remember the mom would be like, oh my gosh, te dije, vas a tener que leer más, right? Like they just felt validated, and then they felt like I've been telling the teacher this, like I knew it, right? I did the same thing to one of my first parents who was not a Latino family. And oh my God, they were appalled that I would speak to them with such disrespect. And I was majorly confused. And I remember my principal was like, hey, do you have a minute? And I was like, yeah. And she was telling me about like the concern that the parent had raised. And I was so confused. I was like, what do you mean she felt disrespect? What did I do wrong? I was telling her where her child was at. And it's like, we really have to practice how we speak with our families. And there's maybe a different route. Maybe you can encourage them to read more. Um, and I remember going home thinking, that's not me. I remember telling her, that's not me. I can't do that. She's like, well, if you want to keep your job, you might want to change your approach. And I mean, I was a baby, right? Like this is when I barely started my teaching career. I remember going home though and thinking, I want to be authentic. That doesn't feel like my authentic self. And I was really thinking hard, well, how do I do it? And then I was like, well, maybe I'll just show her the data. I already had printed all the map testing, dibbles, scores, like I had printed everything. So I was like, let me do it that route. So next day I had a different parent, and I was like, I printed out the norm, right? The national norm for maps. And I was like, this is where your students at. This is where nationally your students should be. This is where your students at right now. And then I would pause, and I would just wait for the parent to react and be like, oh my gosh, like my child's really behind. And then I'd enter, right? And I'd be like, yes, and there's many things we can do at home. Here's what I'm working on. And we were able to have more positive conversation. And that's where I was introduced to data. And I was like, you know what? I can really use data to do the talking for me. I can remain within my authentic self while still advocating for the student, while still, ABC, but use data to manage that. And so that's how my love for data started per se, right? Um, but when I became a leader, when I became a building leader and even a district leader, anytime we would review any kind of data, I would always hear comments like, the data is not a representation of our students. The data does not paint the picture, the reality of our students. It's just numbers, which I get. I get it. I also get that our um, historically marginalized students will always score lower. Research supports that. Research actually supports that Black and Brown students will score the lowest because these tests are not designed for them, right? This is another thing of our system that we have. Um, but I just remember hearing those kind of things. And I also have come into spaces where the leader before me weaponized data. And as I am growing as a leader myself, but I'm also learning that data can be a flashlight. It's not a weapon. It can be a flashlight. And so being able to look at data, to look at the stories, what is this data? What stories is it telling us about our students? What patterns can we identify? How could we use data differently in a way that is going to highlight where the system is broken and for whom? So that's how we use data. We use data to look at how is this system broken and what is the data telling us of what portion is broken so we can work on that, right? In looking at data in from going from treating the data as a box to check because let's look at data, we're going to do a data walk, we're going to do some data reviews, but truly just start using it, like I said, like a flashlight and ask yourself certain questions like, who is this system working for? Who's being left out, hidden, or erased in this data? What patterns are showing up again and again and again? And what are we pretending not to see? That's the whole purpose of equity data is we're going to put on those glasses, those equity glasses, and really dig into stories and patterns that the data is telling us. And again, looking at the data, what would be the most important question to ask is what will we do now that we know? What will we do now that we know? Because data doesn't mean anything without action. Great. We're highlighting where the system is broken. We're highlighting patterns. We're highlighting that this grade is amazing. We're highlighting, we're seeing our glows. We're seeing our grows, right? But it's nothing without action. So without interpretation, without heart, corazón, without any of that, that's not going to give you the meat of the work in data. So that's when I personally realized that data with corazon, that's a revolution. When we're using data to flip the system, that's a revolution. So today uh, when I've overseen programs or when I'm coaching leaders or doing our equity audit programs, when I'm doing an auditing of the data, data is always the entry point, but I'm not just asking for numbers. I'm asking for the stories behind the numbers. I'm asking for the historical context. I take us back to 10 years if we need to 20 years, right? And I'm asking questions like, why are multilingual learners graduating at lower rates than special ed students? Why are our students with disabilities outperforming our multilingual learners? Because it's not an ability issue. It's an access issue. Why are dual language programs under enrolled in schools serving Black and Brown kids? Why are our affinity groups or equity goals not showing up in our outcomes? So I don't use data to place blame. I use it to pull back the curtain and to help folks get honest. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. And that's where the real work happens. But that's where the real work happens when one's motivated to do it. Again, we're not weaponizing it. We are using it as a flashlight. So if you're an educator, a leader, a parent, I challenge you to go look at your data this week, not just test scores or graduation rates, but access, opportunity, and representation. Ask yourself these questions. What story is this data telling me? Whose voices are missing? And what needs to be flipped? Because we, my friends, my familia, we're about flipping the system. That's right. So you don't have to be a data analyst. You don't need to have your doctorate. You don't need to be this like scientific coder. You just have to have ganas and care enough to look. So when we listen to the data with clear eyes and full hearts, our corazón, that's where we start finding the cracks in the system. And that's where we create room for change. And you have to go back to where you can find the crack in the system because you're not going to go back 2 years, 3 years. We're going to go back to where was that system interrupted? Where was it broken? Where was it cracked and where was it broken? And then you can move forward and create that room for change. So, thank you for listening today. I am really excited because I'm going to have a guest speaker at our next podcast. And don't forget to check me out on Instagram. All right. Have a good day. Until next time. Okay, mi gente. Thanks for listening to Dr. Jen Flips the System. Be sure to subscribe, share, and connect at conganaseducation.com or find us on the gram at Dr. Jen Flips the System. Until next time, lead with vision, grit, and corazon, because the system may be broken, but so are the chains. Adios.